Tina resurrected Jason, and now he's a repaint. Here's your look at the NECA Toys Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, The Ultimate Jason Voorhees 2022 reissue. There's a curse in these woods, Jason Voorhees' curse. They say he died as a boy, but he keeps coming back. Few have seen him and lived. Some have tried to stop him. No one can. He's out there, waiting. Figure comes included with interchangeable head, alternate mask, brush cutter, wood cutter, sickle, knife, tent stake, machete, and axe. When you go to long distance, your dad and Jason's answering the call instead. That's gotta suck. What also maybe sucks is the fact that even though I just recently looked at the 2020 Friday the 13th Part 7 Jason Voorhees, I knew very well that I was eventually going to be picking up the 2022 reissue, but I didn't realize it was going to be this quick. Sure enough, I did end up finding this over on Entertainment Earth. It was hot off the truck. Is there enough changes made between the two figures that did justify me having to pick this figure up again? I know the answer. You may not know the answer just yet. You will soon. Just after, though, I take the tape measure that tells us that this version of Jason Voorhees is about 7¼ inches in height, or it's about 19 centimeters tall. I guess we don't really have to wait that long to find out. Sliding over the Jason that we're about to have a look at from the 2022, bringing in the Jason that we've already had a look at from 2020. Only really a difference of 2 years. Looking at the two, can you really see a lot of difference? Not a lot. In fact, the only thing I can really pinpoint as being different between the two figures is maybe the coloring of his suit. This one has a slight more greenish tint to what's left at least of his costuming. This one comes across a little bit more of a grayer scale of that green. The underbody, again, what's little left of it, doesn't look like it's that much different from one figure to the other. I will say that there is one thing that's different that has been improved with the 2022. Again, only a difference of 2 years, is that I think the quality of the mask is just a tad bit better. As for Jason's accessories, the quantity count still remains the same, although again, slight tweaks here and there to the paint. I'll do my best to kind of go through everything so you guys can get an idea of exactly what's different between the two. This is the new sickle that we're getting from the 2022. 2 years back from that, this is the original sickle that we got. The colors are maybe a little bit darker of a silver here for the actual curved part of the blade, while the actual handle is a little bit lighter here on the one that was 2020 versus 2022. And again, I'll compare many of them. I'll compare as best as I can all of the accessories so you can see the differences between the two. The sickle, though, still has one of those things where it's sandwiched in between what would have been its wooden handle. It's a little bendy, so you really want to be careful when you are first taking this out of the tray. Pulling this out first immediately, it was bending a lot more than I was really hoping, and almost for a second I thought that I broke it. Wasn't the case, luckily. The figure also comes included. Let's just put all the accessories. I'm going to do my best to kind of keep all the accessories organized as best as I can. The figure also comes included with a tent spike. The tent spike, again, to bring back in the other one that we had a look at here. You can see the coloring, first of all, of the red, of the blood, is a lot lighter here for the one that was 2020. The one from 2 years after that is a lot darker of a red. The actual stake itself looks to be exactly the same. I don't know if looking at one to the other, I would really be able to tell the difference between the two silvers. But the reds right away, I know the difference is the darker one is the one that comes packed with this one. The lighter red is the one that we got from the Jason from before. The figure also comes included with his butcher's knife. Not really one that I think I even may have said this when we looked at the 2020 version of Jason Voorhees. It's not really a weapon I ever really think of Jason wielding. Machetes, sure, yes. Axes, of course. And of course, whatever thing that he's whacking away the doctor with. All the things I think of when I think of Jason Voorhees, the first thing I don't tend to think of is a butcher's knife. But though, of course, bringing in the one that we did get from the earlier one, I do think that maybe the one that we got from the earlier Jason was a better sculpted, maybe not better sculpted, they're exactly the same blade. But I do think maybe that the one on the bottom from the one before has a much better wood grain to it. You know, this one has a little bit more of a lighter color. It's got also a little bit more wear on the end of the handle. I think the wood grain is maybe just on a little bit better on the first one that we got. Maybe not as good for the 2022 reissue. The Jason also comes included, of course, with his axe. The axe is unfortunately one thing I can't do the comparison for because the axe, if you remember, it's still over there. It's over there. It flung out of the hand of Jason during that review, and it's only now actually me looking at this review that it reminded me that it's still over there. That axe is still out there. Waiting. It's just over there, though. I got to go pick it up. The axe itself, not having the other one in front of me. Still, again, it's the exact same one. It has some nice silver on the end of it. Got some little blood there on the bottom of it as well. And a little bit of red staining makes its way onto the wooden handle. Nice, by the way, nice accessory to be displaying with the figure. I have actually one of my Jasons on my shelf right now. It may have been part 3. I've got him displayed right now with an axe. Always a good go-to weapon. Speaking of go-to weapons, Jason also comes included with his machete. And again, comparisons, we could bring in the other one. This would be also a little harder one to kind of see the differences between the two and be able to spot right away, okay, yeah, that's the newer one. It definitely has a much better paint job. Maybe I would say like the newer one has a little bit more of a cleaner finish, but like the blades themselves, this one's a little bit shinier of a blade. This one's a little bit more of a duller blade, but the colors of the silvers are at least pretty identical to one another. The figure also comes included with his bush cutter. The wood cutter, I called it a bush cutter. The wood cutter, just to bring in again the one that we got from before. The blade, this one, by the way, is the 2022. This is the one over from 2020. The coloring of the actual blade itself, maybe a little bit darker on this one. The yellows, I say this yellow's got to clean up my eyes. The oranges are a little bit lighter here on the 2022. Maybe not as bright here for the 2020. And the coloring of the wood handle is actually a little bit lighter here. I mean, the strange thing is about like talking about cleaning up my eyes. I mean, it almost for a second looks like the handle here on the one that was 2 years before looks like it's actually a little bit thicker than the one we get here now. I'm sure that's not the case, and it's probably just my eyes playing tricks on me. But doesn't this one actually look like it's a slightly thicker handle than the one we get here from before? Also, the figure comes included. Speaking of the bush cutter, the figure comes included with this one. One of my favorite go-to accessories when it comes to Friday the 13th Part 7 Jason Voorhees. For the longest of times, I had the figure displayed with the bush cutter. And again, just to bring in the original bush cutter, I know obviously I'm just doing a comparison back and forth between the two. The newer one notably seems to have a little bit more of a rusting paint finish to it. See how it's got a little bit more of a brown wash across it? The original one didn't have as much of that. This one had also as well a little bit of a wash of black added here. This one I will say though, maybe isn't as impressive because while it's a lighter gray, or lighter, here I'm mixing up colors here. While it's a lighter orange, it doesn't maybe have some of the additional polished finishes. Like maybe I like this one just because it's got a little bit more black on it. This one is just basically more of a matte orange. The actual main contraption, the part that of course that's going to be drawing back the cord, looks to be again like this one's a little bit more of a lighter. It doesn't have as much maybe the finer detailed finishes that the original one had. The one from 2020 definitely has a much sharper paint job. This one doesn't have it as much. The other thing that the figure also comes included with as well is, of course, the swappable head sculpt. Let's just actually put Jason back in middle frame here. Also comes with the interchangeable head sculpt. Also comes included with the coarse broken away mask that's going to split away in the middle. Then, of course, before that, the figure also comes included with some swappable hands. The hands aren't really that much different from the other Jason Voorhees. They finish-wise, at least from the paint standpoint, they look to be almost identical. I'm just not going to even bring them in because they look exactly the same. What maybe isn't exactly the same, I will say, and here's where some of the changes are going to be making. Cosmetic changes, obviously. There are non-cosmetic changes that have been made where I feel like here's the original ripped away mask. If we remember in the movie, of course, Tina uses her telekinetic powers, and actually splits away the mask on Jason's face. It just rips down the middle and splits open, revealing his ugly mug in the middle. The thing I noticed about the mask, though, this is the newer one. This is the original one. You may not be able to notice right away the differences between the two. This one has a little bit more of a darker color approach when it comes to the mask. It does have a little bit more of an airbrushing down just below the eyes. And I will say as well, like the plastic feels a little bit thicker. Not thick, obviously, to the point where, like, looking at the two, you'd be able to spot one over the other. But I will say, like, the original mask, while still being good, has a little bit more of a softer plastic. Now, I don't know necessarily if they have just improved upon the plastic, but the plastic does feel like it's a little bit better, at least for the mask. That is not only just the case for this mask, but it's also the case for the mask that's on his head right now. Of course, to go along with that mask, we also get this alternate head sculpt that does have Jason's quite very ugly mask, ugly mug. Here's the original one. To look at the two, would you be able to really spot one from the other and say, oh, this one is notably better than this one? Maybe I would say like this one does it a little bit better by having a more sharper, more defined eye. The newer one, the one that's, again, 2022, there's not really a lot of difference really between the two, other than maybe just like the paint's a little bit shinier on this one. But I think like the paint is a little bit better handled on the 2020 release. And in both the cases, obviously, you can take yourself the mask. If you look at the back of the mask, there's obviously that little peg. The peg, if you look on the back of Jason's head, actually, there's a hole right there. So like the one that we had done before, you just take that little peg, plug it on the back of Jason's head, and then you're just going to have the split mask in the middle. Now, you could just have it pretty close to his face. Obviously, it's not going to stretch across and actually fit the figure's face, but you can also have it to the point where it kind of looks like the mask has just been split down the middle. Now, again, obviously, you can take this head sculpt, pop it off with the existing one that we're about to do, and then if you want to have the figure displayed like this, or again, if you wanted to have completely the mask off, you just would detach it on the back of that provided hole, and then you could have Jason Voorhees displayed this way as well. So that's all of the accessories, short of the flung across the room axe that still is right over there. It's still out there. It's actually, it's just right over there. So let's get a closer look now at Jason. Now, again, we've already established the fact that the cosmetic changes really aren't enough to maybe justify people that were maybe on the fence as to whether they really wanted to get the upgrade. That's only really a 2-year difference. This is the original one. This is the newer one. In a way, I was kind of hoping that the newer Jason was going to have a much darker coloring of his costuming. The thing I really also wanted to mention in that review was the fact that when we were looking at this one, I knew very well that I was going to eventually get the one because they were advertising it as a pre-order on Entertainment Earth. So I knew the moment that it dropped in inventory on their site, I was going to pull the trigger right away. And ultimately, I pulled the trigger a lot earlier than I thought I was going to have to. I mean, I thought it was going to probably be like another couple of weeks after the review. It literally was a week later after I shot the review for this guy. Now, obviously with this one, it does have the colors more closer to kind of an olive green. If you were to say compare the two, I mean, you would really have to look at this with a fine-tooth comb and a little magnifying glass to really spot the differences between the two. But I'm hoping like a review like this will at least show you guys there really isn't, again, a lot of changes really between the two. This one, if anything, you could say the newer one has a slightly lighter gray approach to his suit versus the more green color that this one has. I still really wish that they could release at some point this same figure, but really darkening the colors of it and adding a nice, like, clear finish to it so it would look like Jason's soaking wet. As unfortunately is the case, they went the opposite direction of coloring this guy. Instead of making a much darker coloring than the earlier looked at Jason, which I just flung across the tray, instead of actually being a darker approach to this Jason, ultimately, though we kind of get the same Jason, it's just a slight lighter shade gray. Head sculpts are going to be exactly the same really between the two. But I feel like, again, when it comes to the mask, it sits a little bit better on his face. One of my big issues, if I had any issues, and the issue list is really quite small in this figure, is like maybe the mask doesn't sit always 100% perfect on the figure's face. The mask is also not super soft, but you can feel when you're taking the figure's face or you're taking this off the figure's face that the mask has a little bit of softness to it. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I don't feel it sits 100% perfect on the figure's face. This new Jason, I will say, not to startle anybody right there, the new figure's face, actually, the mask that sits on it, seems to be like it's a little bit of a harder plastic. Mask from a standpoint of a sculpting is exactly the same, but I do think like the paint coloring here is just a little bit nicer here on the side. Of course, putting this on the figure's face, the one thing that wasn't always so much an issue until eventually I started to have it notice that the strap here, I ended up having to glue this strap. I may have even mentioned in the review of him. This one section on the side of his mask came completely off. I had to glue it back in place. The newer mask doesn't seem to have that problem. Now, I don't know if it's the case that they're using longer pegs. It probably isn't the case, but maybe it's also just the fact that it's using harder plastic. I just think like the mask is a little nicer done here on the newer one. And again, the only difference really is 2 years between the two. From the rest of the bodies are going to be exactly the same. Some of the colors, like for the red, for example, I'm just going to part the curtains here in the middle here. So his stomach on the 2020 had a little bit more reddish coloring around the stomach section. This newer Jason, and again, this will only vary from figure to figure, the one that I at least have has a lot less red and a little bit more like a brownish burgundy. So the colors are a little bit more spread apart here on this figure. They were a little bit more centralized around his belly button. Some of the details also for the rest of his biceps and his hands, you can see like the hands are pretty much exactly the same. The legs are a little bit more notably red here on the 2020 and maybe aren't as red here when you get the 2022 release. The boots and the legs are exactly the same if you actually look at the back of the bodies as well. Now, again, like this is the newer one. This is the one that's only, again, like 2 years younger than that. The back of the bodies, again, where you see the spinal cord of Jason is a little bit more darker and a little lighter here on the newer one, or the original one. So again, like there are enough changes, but not enough. I feel like sometimes if you luck out, and I've done this a couple of times where I've picked up a reissue figure And in fact, it was a better looking figure. Sometimes I've also picked up reissue NECA figures where they haven't been as good. And sometimes the paint has suffered a little bit, where I've actually been more enjoying the original versions of those figures rather than the ones I got a little bit later. This is like one of those cases where, other than maybe just the quality of the plastic is a little bit better on the mask, and just, again, a few little changes and tweaks, there's really not a lot that's different between this Jason and the other Jason from before. Now, of course, the articulation is going to also be still the same. Before, of course, we look at the articulation, let's just remove the mask. Once again, to give you guys the stock head sculpt underneath that. And while we're also, of course, at it, let's grab the other Jason here and take off the mask so you can see the differences between the two. This is also one other thing I will say there's a difference between the two. So it isn't just a case of the costume is slightly tweaked. The original one had a little bit more of a lighter coloring of that brown around the area of his face, or what's little left of it, and also the coloring around his eyes. See, this one actually does have a little bit more of a lighter brown, but it's maybe not to the point where it feels too extreme of a color change. It's still, I mean, obviously between the two heads, I still think they look like walnuts, but I think like this one maybe does the job a little bit better, with the defaulted head sculpts at least. To change out the heads, though, is still a case of just popping off the head here. The thing about it, though, is you want to make sure that the chain doesn't come loose. Well, the chain is a separate loose piece anyways, but when you are removing the head, you want to kind of hold on to the chain, because you don't want that flinging across the room. Popping off the one head, replacing it now with the other one. A little bit of pressure may be required on your part to pop that back in place. Now, again, you have the screaming face of Jason, which again then does rely on the, you can take the mask and just plug it onto the back. I won't plug it onto the back because we're going to look at the rest of the figure's articulation, which is, the head sculpt is going to be once again on that ball post. So it does move down only by just a little bit. It moves up, and it moves also back and forth as well. As for his arms, the arms still hinge out. I did notice, though, with the newer Jason that the arms are a lot tighter. That's actually across the board, with even like the elbow joints, the leg joints. Kind of goes without the, goes with the territory. If you're going to be picking up a new figure, after all, you'd like to think that a lot of the joints are going to be tight anyways. Jason's arms do rotate all the way around. Like I said, the figure does have a double hinge in his elbows. There's one right there, one right there. So you get a good range of motion when it comes to his elbows. Hands do rotate also all the way around. Jason's upper torso is once again still on a ball joint. And then if underneath the actual shirt, which is again softer plastic, there is a secondary ball joint right there as well. Legs do split out once again. Maybe this leg is a little on the looser side, but still a lot tighter of a joint than the original Jason I had in my collection. You can move the legs forward and back. There's a swivel at the top of the thigh. Once again, a single hinge only for the knee, but allows at least the leg to rotate back and forth. Again, just like all the detail. It's not just until you get a chance like this, where at least I get the chance to bring these figures out of the, I don't want to say out of the woodwork, but I mean, bringing them back off the shelf, because the other Jason I had on the shelf for a long time. It's just kind of nice to get a chance to see these guys again in front of the camera. Just really great sculpts, continued great sculpts from NECA Toys. But yeah, again, he has the articulation here for the ankle. It moves up and down. You can also rock it back and forth as well. But all in all, like, it's not enough of a change where I feel like if again, you guys are on the fence and you think to yourself, well, I don't know, this guy's talking about getting the 2022 reissue. Was it really worth it? I mean, here's the original Jason Voorhees. You can kind of see for yourself. Hopefully videos like this, even though really looking at the figures, I don't feel like there was enough that if I was to look back on it now, I probably would have even pulled the trigger to get the 2022. Because, I mean, really, there's not enough changes, I feel. If it was a case, say, for example, that they darken the shirt and darken the pants to give it that really dark, wet look, then that would be a deal breaker. I mean, that would be definitely well worth picking up. But as he is right now, there really isn't a lot of changes really between the two figures. If anything could be said for these, the benefit of now having two alternate head sculpts, which was the case obviously when we looked at this figure as well, it means that now, where I wasn't able to do this before, I now have two Jason figures that I can have on the shelf. One that I can keep masked, which I was doing for the longest of times, and then now with a newer Jason, I can actually have this one unmasked. Again, I do hope that down the road, even though I am always consistently looking out on the horizon for, especially Entertainment Earth. It's always the place that I go to when it comes, and it's not a plug-in for Entertainment Earth. It's just the fact that Entertainment Earth does often very much list things that are hot off the truck. So I've been asked several times by you guys, the viewing audience, like, how do you always know if something is new in stock? Entertainment Earth, first of all, will always tell you if it's hot off the truck. And if it's hot off the truck, it also tells you the month and the day that it's hot off the truck. So like, if this guy was just released recently, I think this guy was actually released in, I want to say like the end of December, early January. You knew right away, or at least I had a guess at least, that they probably weren't going to be restocking something that happened like 2 years ago. They were likely restocking something that was a new lot number. I mean, ultimately it just meant that I was getting a figure that looked exactly the same, or just enough of a change that, again, it probably wasn't worth the investment to get into it. Other than, again, I just can have two Jasons displayed differently on my shelf. And for a Jason that looked this good in the first place, that's not a bad thing at all. For those that may be looking at this Jason and thinking the guy behind the camera may have wasted some money to invest the time to buy a Jason that was only a 2-year difference, maybe, but to keep in mind as well that this Jason has 2 different head sculpts. He has 2 different ways of being displayed, so it really wasn't a waste of money to venture out and buy another one of these. It's always really a gamble, and if anybody's been following this channel long enough knows, I'm always one that gambles on the idea of a reissue with the hopes that something's going to be different between the 2 figures. Even if it isn't, I'll still do a review of it so you guys can see the differences. So if you already have the 2020, for example, you can tell based on this video if it's even worth to pick up one that's 2022. For me, at least, there's enough changes that if I was to say put them 2 in front of me, I may not know right away which one is 2020, which one is 2022, but I would know that looking between the 2, there are subtle, and again, I have to stress that, there are subtle differences between this one and the one that we came out like 2 years ago, or looking at, of course, the calendar is 2024. The first one was 4 years ago when it first came out. This one's only like a 2-year-old figure. So again, like there's enough changes where like looking at the 2 in front of me, I can see that there's definitely spotted differences cosmetically. I mean, obviously from a sculpt standpoint, the sculpts are going to be exactly the same. It isn't one of those cases where we just lucked out with the Michael Myers, where that Michael Myers had a completely brand new head sculpt. This Jason's going to be doing the things the same way. All the accessories are going to be exactly the same. And I tried to do my best to kind of show you guys the differences between the machetes and all the various weapons that he wields, except for the axe. The axe is still over there. But I mean, you can pick and choose for yourself what things you want to display with the figure. Just because it comes with the 2020 doesn't mean it has to be displayed with the 2020. If you think like, for example, the bush cutter looked better with this Jason, just use the accessories that you want to use when you put them on the shelf. I'm still holding out hope though. And again, talking by the guy who just continues to buy all these reissues, I do hope at some point that we might get ourselves a 2023, a 2024. I mean, obviously it's not 2025 yet, but I hope that we do get ourselves eventually a release of this guy. I'm speaking directly to NECA Toys. Make the coloring of his suit darker. I mean, we already know we've got him in green. We already have him in a slightly lighter shade of that with a 2022 reissue. Hope that we get a 2024 reissue, even one after that, that gets the colors a lot darker. Add a little bit of a clear finish to that so it looks like Jason's wet, because he spends a lot of the time in the movie kind of soaking wet. And I'd like to think that a figure can kind of reflect some of that. Take some of the cues perhaps of the dream sequence Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 5 and take some of those elements and drop them over here for Friday the 13th Part 7 Jason Voorhees, The New Blood. But what do you guys think of this figure? Let me know down below in the comments section. Obviously, it's one of those cases where this reissue isn't all that much different than the one that we already had a look at, but do you feel like there's enough to still justify picking this figure up for yourself? I mean, still, it's one of those cases, I already did say this, probably beating a dead horse, but still one of those cases, honestly, even if the figure looked identical to one another, which it isn't 100%, but I could still have the figures displayed, one with the mask separated in the middle and kind of split off the side of his face, and I can have the other Jason Voorhees with the hockey mask still intact. As a side note, though, the hockey mask is one thing that's different between this figure, other than a slight cosmetic change. The plastic for the hockey mask feels notably harder on this one than the one that we looked at before. But what do you guys think of this figure? Let me know down below in the comment section. And have you ever picked up a reissue of a NECA figure? If you did, let me know which figure it was down below in the comments section, and let me know if the changes were justified picking him up. Obviously, it would be a lot easier if I could just have found this guy in the stores. Local comic book stores, slim to none when it comes to usually the new NECA stuff. So a lot of times, again, I pick them up at places at Entertainment Earth. Not necessarily a plug to Entertainment Earth, but just the idea, again, like you always know when things are hot off the truck. I think this guy might actually be out of stock as of right now, but of course I'm always going back to checking out the site to see whenever new NECA things are hot off the truck. And usually I'll be the guy that's first in line to be grabbing them, and of course a video like that will follow after that. But what do you guys think of the figure? Of course, if you guys did enjoy this video and want to throw it a like, of course all the things like hitting that subscribe button down below and turning on the bell notification are all the more important things to help you know whenever the person behind the camera like me is posting new content. And while we are wrapping up things right now for Jason that's not that much different, we are going to be looking at some more NECA reviews in the pipeline. So, of course, making sure you're coming back here on a regular basis. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.